if the Old Testament law reflects God's character, why do modern sensibilities seemingly, why are they more humane? And the text that comes up a lot is Deuteronomy 21, 18 through 21, about a rebellious son being stoned for his rebellion. Seems like something we wouldn't do today. And if the law reflects God's character, why are we so...
Well, first of all, the Old Testament law was never intended to be the ideal law for all time. It was made for a theocratic nation in a situation that there was barbarism all around them. In fact, there's a wonderful book called Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan that goes into all of these things. And he points out the Old Testament law is not the ideal for all time. Now, some aspects of it were, the Ten Commandments, these kind of things. But technically, the Ten Commandments don't apply to us today because they're part of the Old Covenant. When they're repeated in the New Testament, they do apply to us today. But generally, anything from Exodus 20 right through Deuteronomy, that's all the Old Testament. And the writer of Hebrews says the Old Covenant is obsolete, Hebrews 8:13. So all that has been superseded. Now, the situation with stoning children, if you look at this, and you guys know who Dennis Prager is? Dennis Prager is a conservative Jewish man who has a radio program and has written books. He points out that this was actually, and I don't know if I can remember his argument completely, this was actually an improvement to the law at the time, because in order to have a disobedient child killed, you would have to bring them to the elders, and the case would have to be made, right? Without the law, the parent in that culture was able to kill the child without any sort of agreement from anybody else. So this actually protected the child. But remember, in the Old Testament, they're living under the theocratic kingdom, where punishment was greater than it is today, because God is literally Israel's king. Whereas today, there is no theocracy. There is no theocratic king on the earth today as it was back in, or theocracy as it was back in Israel's time.
Right. I guess my concern is that when people are trying to discern themselves whether or not God is worthy of love and worship, like someone's question said, they're thinking about a God who would have made a law that way, as that being an extension of his character. Even though it's not in effect today, he did that, and that makes him less credible to them.
Right, but what are they doing when they're saying that? They have a moral standard outside of themselves that they're trying to say God doesn't meet.
Right.
If they're an atheist, they have no moral standard outside themselves.
So this person's not an atheist.
Okay, if this person's not an atheist, here is the only legitimate way of saying the God of the Bible is immoral. God does exist, but he's not the God of the Bible. Okay, then make your case about this other God, and what do you do with the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead and affirm the Old Testament?
They would say that evidence is shaky, and they would also say that, I guess, like that's their problem. They're agnostics, so they're trying to discern which God. They believe all of the theological arguments, scientific arguments.
Okay, well then I would say just continue to do research and continue to follow the evidence where it leads.
And they landed at Deuteronomy 21, and they're having a problem with it. I don't know.
Okay, well then get the book, Is God a Moral Monster? And take a look at that there. But in reality, I mean, this is going to sound harsh for a second. If God is God, God can take us out anytime he wants. You see, if Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location. Right? God can take us out at 2 years old or 82 years old. It's up to him. And so for them to say that God is immoral because he creates a standard that's trying to show everybody that you can't live up to this standard, and if you continue to be disobedient, we're going to take you out because you're going to pollute the rest of the people in God's society, and we're trying to bring the Messiah through this bloodline to save the whole world. If you're not going to play properly, we're going to take you out and put you into eternity now. It doesn't mean that those children weren't saved. Maybe they were, right? But it's God's, it's the same thing with the Canaanites. If God wants to take people out now because they've been disobedient, he can do that. In fact, he does it even in the New Testament. He takes out Ananias and Sapphira, doesn't he? So see, we think God is, as C.S. Lewis said, a benevolent old man looking down on us and who just wants everybody to have just a grand old time. That's not God. God is loving, but he's also just. And if he's not just, he's not really loving. Because if God does not punish sin, he's not loving either.